Good afternoon, panelists. Good afternoon, members from the gas industry. It's quite an honor to do this on behalf of the SAQCC Gas. Just a quick introduction here. If you look very nicely at the topic, it's called "Avoid Disciplinary Action Through Compliant Practice." I'm going to focus on the compliance side of it, and I'm going to focus on practice side of it. In other words, the behavior of the gas practitioner within the legal framework and within the regulatory framework and within the disciplinary framework. So this is not an initiator course or a chairing a hearing course. This is purely information to make you aware of the rules and regulations surrounding disciplinary action should one misbehave. So that's very important to understand the angle of this presentation, and I really hope you enjoy it. Our focus areas, as you see there, is just quickly, you can read it for yourself. It's why is there a registration process and why is there a disciplinary process? We're going to talk about discipline and compliance in terms of the relationship between each other, rules governing the system, the SAQCC Gas as the registration and disciplinary body. And then, of course, who is responsible for what within the disciplinary framework? There are different disciplinary approaches because you're going to have the SAQCC as a body, you're going to have the associations as a body, and you're going to have the Department of Employment and Labor as a body. Also, we have to look at the codes that you need to work according to, the code of conduct, which is part of the disciplinary process, and of course, the gas practitioner code of good practice, which all of you do sign, and you solemnly swear to uphold it. And then we're going to look at some offences coming out of the disciplinary policies. And we're going to end off with hearings to date from the past. And then the last one, I'm just going to put your business in perspective of the interrelationship on functional safety conformity. So it's a lot of things to say. There are about 29 slides. I do take a little bit longer, as people always remind me, because I get a bit passionate about it. So let's get started. But that's the focus of this session for the next half an hour. The question you must always ask yourself is, are there persons not registered operating illegally? Are there people 2 and 3 registered but working outside of scope? Are there people that are registered that don't conform to the standards, the respective health and safety standards, and of course to the pressure equipment regulation? These are things you've got to ask yourself, because I'm sure you get acquainted with them or you meet people that are doing the wrong things. The other thing is all these gas practitioners or people working in industry doing a disservice, that's injustice to your professional? That's really important to understand that. At the end of the day, it's a brand. Your brand as your own business is a brand, and you as a gas practitioner execute that brand. So are people doing injustice to this brand or this industry of yours? Then, of course, inferior workmanship, people negotiating safety, and is it fine if a system is 80%, 90% compliant? You must always ask, what happened to the balance? What happened to the 10% that doesn't comply? And how's that if you put your compliance hat on or you put your safety hat on? So the question you got to ask yourself is, how do you address these, let's call it misbehaviors or non-conforming processes? And that, I think, is part of the SAQCC's mandate, is to remedy these things. And if you don't want to be remedied, we've got to somehow tell you to get rid of you. So the question is, why is there a registration and disciplinary process? Very simply put, we are a profession. I said again, just like your business is a brand, the SAQCC Gas is a brand, and we have to uplift it and live according to that brand. Also, number 2 is fulfilling the Department of Employment and Labor's mandate, because that's where we get our mandate from. And then, of course, you belong to a registration body, and that body needs integrity and credibility, which it does have. The SAQCC sees it as doing the right things right. It needs to protect the industry, in this case, the gas industry, the 4 gases and the 4 gas industries. So you've got to protect that work environment. The other one is ensuring maintaining safe practices, remedy poor behavior and workmanship, and then, of course, promoting good conduct. The last one is a bit of a negative, but if people don't want to listen, people don't want to hear, people don't want to remedy themselves or be remedied, and they don't want to improve, then it doesn't help to have that person in the gas industry, because at the end of the day, the SAQCC needs to protect its brand, and the same as you in your own work as a brand. The question always is ignorance an excuse? Which it isn't. Why this triangle is here is very specific. I see it as a discipline compliance kind of triangle. Why? Because gas practitioners are people. You're working with people. You are working with appliances and you're working with equipment. And of course, there's the legislative framework under which you operate. In this case, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the pressure equipment regulations, and of course, the specific or respective health and safety standards you have to adhere to and in which you're licensed to comply. The question is, what's in the middle here? Think of it now. You got people, you got appliances, you work with appliances, you work in a framework. It all goes about one thing, and it's safety. And that's very important in terms of this triangle. Everything centers around safety. But you need to educate people. You need to make sure the appliances are of good quality and safe, and you need to understand the legislative framework to ensure a safety. So if you don't behave properly in one of these, or you non-compliant in one of these, it can become a concern. So let's look at the rules, which I call rules governing it. As I mentioned before, you got a mandate from the Department of Labor, or Employment and Labor, sorry, my error, but Department of Employment and Labor. You got codes of good practice, which the gas practitioner signs. You got a code of good conduct coming out of the disciplinary process, and of course, you have the disciplinary process itself. So those are the only rules governing that framework, and where you get your strength from, and it speaks to discipline, and it speaks to compliance, and it speaks to safety. And that's very important to understand that. Obviously, you all know the pressure equipment regulations, in this case, Regulation 17. That's where you get your license from. That's where the mandate comes from the Department of Employment and Labor to the SAQCC to establish a mandate to register competent persons, in your case, the gas practitioner. So you can't ignore this in your handling and your workings with gas and gas equipment. You cannot ignore the regulation, especially 17, but not excluding any other regulation within the pressure equipment regulations. So of course, this is where you are. You install or remove a gas appliance or a gas system or a gas articulation system, unless you're an authorized person. So that's where you get your license from. That's where the SAQCC gets its mandate from. So you can work in the field under license. So that's an important piece of legislation that you need to understand. Obviously, the mandate, as I said before, just in a different scheme of things, the mandate comes from the Department of Labor. That, of course, gets derived out of the OST Act, but in this case, the pressure equipment regulations. It mandates the registration body, which is SAQCC Gas, and of course, these four associations. If you don't know, there are four associations in this country. If you don't know, now you know it. And these four gas associations cover all the gas types in this country. And obviously, these four gas associations form the board of the registration body under the mandate of the Department of Employment and Labor. So this is where I will call you get your teeth from. You get your strength from top down. So what approach is there to the disciplinary process? It says that it depends on the type and severity, and we can come to that later, but that's true. It goes about how serious is the offense. But generally speaking, clinically, the gas associations can also discipline practitioners, its own gas practitioners, not others, its own, in its own industry. So, for example, sanctions can come out there. It can be remedial. I'll come to this later, but you can have an offense, a first warning, a second warning, a third warning, depends on the severity of the offense. And of course, you can escalate it to the next level. The next level is the SAQCC gas. And the SAQCC gas can do exactly the same thing. It can warn you, it can give you first, second, third. And the big difference between gas associations and SAQCC gas is the one at the bottom. The SAQCC gas is the only one that can deregister a gas practitioner. A gas association cannot do that. It hasn't got the mandate to do that. So therefore, if it's a serious offense, you take it to a higher level, and that's the SAQCC gas. So to summarize, you have gas associations can discipline their own industry, and the SAQCC gas also, if it's escalated. And sometimes the severity can be of such a nature, you take it straightforward or start directly to the SAQCC gas. You bypass the association. So there's also an area of responsibility. And it's got two pillars to it. One is registered practitioners is an SAQCC gas responsibility. Non-registered practitioners, and I included appeals, but non-registered practitioners is the Department of Employment and Labour. It's a distinctive difference because the SAQCC gas registers competent people, gives them licenses to work in the gas environment. It's therefore responsible for the registered people only. In this case, registered practitioners. Should we come across persons that in the industry that are not registered, you have the fullest right, you or anybody else has the fullest right to report that to the Department of Employment and Labour, and they need to take it further. So in summary, the SAQCC gas by rights does not associate itself with non-registered practitioners. But it can happen that in your own gas industry, depending on the association itself, it's also wise to, if you identify somebody as not registered, it's best to tackle it face on and remedy it. That's what we do in our gas association, is that we try and remedy it. And of course, if the person doesn't want to listen, we send him to the Department of Employment and Labour. But I believe proactively, it's a good thing to remedy somebody, show the person the way, and if he doesn't want to listen, deal with it then differently. So this is very key approach, and who's responsible here. Then, of course, there's the code of conduct, which I alluded to in the beginning. It's broken up into very serious misconduct offences, serious misconduct offences, and deregistration sanctions. Key to understand it, let's look at them. The first one is fraud, dishonesty, and attempts to misrepresent facts on behalf of self or others, including actual attempted bribery. I think that speaks for itself. You can't do those things. It's just bad practice. It's not acceptable for industry, and it's going to hurt your brand. And the SAQCC won't allow that. The second one is failure to observe company safety procedures. For example, you could be working on site and you don't adhere to that company's policies, or didn't go through a safety session. You cannot do that. Another one is falsification of any documentation. I think that speaks to itself, where you mislead or misrepresent. It's also a very serious misconduct. You can't dope on the site. That's not allowed. Neither drugs. So being found in possession of or under the influence of illegal drugs, alcohol, it's of course taboo. It's a very serious misconduct. This one, I highlight this for a reason, because this is what comes to the fore every now and then, is people working outside their license scope or outside their scope of registration. You cannot do that. You can't work outside your license, and you can't work on another gas to which you are not licensed. So the best is stick within your license registration, or get qualified in the other gases, or expand your scope of licensing. That's the only way you do it. But this happens quite regularly, and it's totally unacceptable and extremely dangerous if something should happen. Also, the code of conduct speaks to the code of good practice for gas practitioners. Just to remind you again, that's the document you signed. First, you got registered, and of course, on renewals, you signed that document where you promise to uphold the codes of good practice. And that document, if you transgress any one of those codes, it can be taken into consideration as a very serious misconduct offense within the code of conduct. Then lesser or also important but serious misconduct offences, the ignoring or failure to carry out correct safe working procedures or observe safety requirements in any situation, and you can read the rest. The big thing is here, where it is notify responsible persons of an unsafe situation or any dangerous hazardous behaviors that could result in injury, death. That's serious. Secondly, under serious misconduct, the negligence of proper procedures. If you're not following suit, you're not following procedures, you're not following the standards, you're careless, that's also seen as a serious misconduct. Again, misrepresenting facts in any document, non-disclosure, in a different form than the previous one. All right? Next, disclosure of confidential information to any party not authorized to receive such information, obviously. Poor workmanship, which I believe can be remedied, but it's an offense. Carelessness on the part of the gas practitioner, unacceptable. Malicious damage to customer property, also. So those are the codes of conduct, very serious or serious, within the code of conduct framework that you need to adhere to. And just by the way, I should have said it in the beginning, all these documentations, the codes of conduct and the practices and the rules governing, these things are on the website. So if you haven't seen that yet, you must download it and make yourself aware of these things. Let's go. I don't know how many of you really go through your codes of good practice, but it's important for me to refresh it for you. It also says, I solemnly promise, or I want to uphold the code of good practice. So it says, undertake only those assignments which fall within my authorized level of registration and scope of work for which I'm competent by virtue of training, experience, and certification. We repeat here, but your code is bringing this out. You cannot work outside of what you're authorized to do. And you cannot work on another gas which you not authorized to do. That's very important. Second one is prior to undertaking any maintenance, repairs, alterations, or additions on equipment and pipelines, it's important to establish who's the owner of that equipment or pipelines. Some companies rent their equipment or rent parts of a pipeline. So before you work on that, you should ask your client, to which you probably have a contract, is this your equipment or is it somebody else's equipment? We see it as part of your code. The third one is, which is a very critical one, and please take heed of it and assimilate it and read it 10 times. It says, you may only sign for work I have personally carried out or work supervised, which I have personal knowledge through direct technical control or supervision. Assimilate that for yourself. A lot of people transgress on that. So, for example, you can't get a project. You stay in Joburg and you get a project in Durban, and you send your people over there and they do their job. But you're the gas practitioner who signs off. The other guys are competent people, and they go and do the job. They dig the pipeline, put the pipeline together, close it, and they say to you they've done the job. And you send the COC from Joburg. You can't do that because you have no level of supervision or technical knowledge of that. So that's very important that you assimilate that code. You must have a level of supervision. The next one is, obviously, you update yourself. I think that you qualify yourself, you improve yourself, you maintain proficiency. I think that's understandable. That's your code. You must read a lot, understand things, ask questions, all these funny things, so you improve your profile. The big thing is, another one is to maintain the highest degree of personal integrity, credibility, and business. As I said, you're a brand. If you want your business to grow or you to be known and to be spoke about as a credible person and with good business ethics, that's your code. Adhere to it. And of course, the infamous one down here, which says, don't walk past something that's unsafe or substandard, or, oh, there's a registered practitioner. I know him, but he's not even registered, but he's working. He got a job, a project with a client. You cannot allow that, people, because you need to protect your own environment. And that's so key about it. You've got to protect your brand, and you've got to do safe practices, 100% standard work, and you've got to be a registered practitioner. The question is, you must ask yourself is, if you are any part of this, you're kind of guilty by association if you've seen that or know of that. So I think we've spoken enough about that. Of course, your change of personal details is important. A lot of people slack in that, but I think it's very important. The same as your driver's license, your gun license, or any municipal license. You've got to change your address. You've got to tell your people where you are. That's very important for the SAQCC gas as well. Then it says to you, you are made aware of the disciplinary code of conduct. Well, that's just what we're doing now. But in your code, it says you are aware of the disciplinary code and the conduct and the disciplinary procedure, which you are access to. It's transparent, and you can receive it anyway, anytime from the SAQCC gas. I'm just giving you a highlighted view of that. Also, it says to you also, I solemnly promise that I will comply with the SAQCC gas antitrust policy meeting rules. So whenever you're in the framework of the SAQCC gas, we don't talk matters of competitive nature. We don't talk matters of pricing, etc. Eluding. That's very important for you to understand it. And I'm very sure in your own businesses, you do the same. If you don't, formalize a policy for yourself and meeting rules. Play the safe game. And then, of course, the last one is you will comply to the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the regulations and all required health and safety standards and the SABS codes of practice. I tried to go through this in the best, simplest way, but you need to read this thing thoroughly 100 times because it's so important to understand what you need, what you're signing and what you're promising and what you need to work according to. Very important. I'm going to show you some, there are many more, but this is still typical errors by default, as it says. Blank sign COCs. I go on holiday for 2 weeks. I sign 5 COCs and I give it to my staff and they go and install whatever they must do or they sign off work. Cannot do that. We have caught people out where they're on holiday already and meanwhile the email says I'm on holiday. So that's the email that proves that you are not at your desk because I'm overseas actually. So you can't give that to your staff. The same as the pressure test certificate. You can't give blank one. You can't sign it and expect it. Remember your level of supervision? That's what's important. Yeah. I think I've said enough of the first 3. The poor workmanship, good. Compromise safety, you can't do that. You've got to be in compliance 100% at all times. You've got to do the right thing right all the time. That's not okay. Let's go next one. Substandard equipment used. You're not complying to the schemes. You're using call it poorer quality equipment. Can't do that. This used to be quite a problem. I think it's less. I don't know. You can answer the same question to yourself. It's mainly on the domestic environment or commercial environment where you will modify an appliance to fit another gas. So you buy an LPG hob. Oh my goodness, the gas is natural gas. So you play around with the burner system and that's not allowed because it goes about the warranty, never mind the safety. I think we spoke enough about lots of people, not lots of people. There's people working outside the scope of their registration. It's an error. It's an offence. Non-conformity to aspects such as regulations, always. Just understand the framework you're working under. You must visualize you are working under the occupational health and safety environment. And under that, there's regulations. And under that, there's health and safety standards. That's the framework you are operating up every day. If you do not understand the legislative framework, you have a problem. So please make sure you qualify yourself in that. This is also very important. You do an installation, doesn't matter if it's domestic, commercial, or industrial, but you're not adhering to the LPG's Safe Appliance Scheme, and you're not adhering to SAGA's Safe Gas Equipment Scheme. We're the only 2 associations that have equipment permits, and that's important that the equipment permit is part of the COC. So you can't install equipment if it's not registered, and you can't sign that COC off if you don't have registered equipment, and that's key. LCOC in SAGA demands permit numbers, so just remember that. And then, of course, you get the chances at the bottom. I took a chance. Sorry, I took a chance. Whatever the case may be, shortcuts doesn't work. These are just examples of people that have been disciplined for these errors. Let's come a bit now closer to home. Is who are the role players in this disciplinary process? Obviously, there's a chairperson, an impartial, unbiased chairperson. In the SAQCC GAS, we've appointed a Labour person who is totally impartial, totally unbiased. So that's very important. That we don't use industry people. We use a total external person. That person is appointed via contract. So obviously, it has an initiator process, or initiator, sorry. It has a defendant. It has witnesses can be called. There's a lot of cross-examinations. And of course, the gas practitioner can also be representative. The defendant can call for representation. That's all part of the disciplinary hearing. Just remember, it's not a court. It's a disciplinary hearing within a certain framework. And then, of course, you get DEL. I put it in red because they're not part of the disciplinary process. They're part of the appeal process. So there's your role players in a nutshell within a disciplinary process. Now, on a very high level, this is what generally happens. The detail is in the devil. It's not on the slide. It's in the documentation, which is available from SAQCC GAS. So obviously, the initiator investigates. So somebody gets appointed, investigates, gets all the facts, purely factual, and puts it together, and then determines the severity. The process is then to inform the SAQCC GAS Disciplinary Committee of this offence. Charges are framed. A notice of disciplinary hearing is sent to the defaulter. We don't necessarily appoint, but we have an impartial chairperson. The hearing takes place. All sides' facts are heard, cross-questioning, left, right, and center. Even the chairperson can ask questions for clarification. Adjourn. Be advised of the decision whether guilty or not. If it's guilty, then there's mitigating and aggravating circumstances. And that's important to understand. So it's a good, fair representation and transparent process here, which is important within the legal framework. So, and then, of course, if you're not guilty, it's fine. If you're guilty, you can go through the mitigating and aggravating from both sides. Somewhere along the line, a decision gets made. Sanction letter by the chairperson of this committee. Sanction letter forwarded to the defendant. And of course, if the defendant wants to, the defendant can appeal to Department of Employment and Labour. Just note, appeal process is not to the association. The appeal process is to the Department of Employment and Labour. So that's just in a nutshell, a kind of logical process or logical sequence of events on high level. Let's look at hearings and offences. As you know, you can do it on association level and SAQCC level. So you'll have the different offences. It all depends on the type and severity of the offence. And that's just the warning, final, written, and of course, you can get deregistration. We recently formulated deregistration sanctions. It's very important to understand it. In the past, you were just deregistered, but we changed that approach a bit. So you kind of have three levels of sanctioning. The first one will be if that's the sanction, is to deregister for 1 year, then under a mentorship. And this will be the action to that sanction. Provide your license and COPC book to SAQCC GAS, and after completion of 1 year mentorship, reapply. So you've got a 1 year deregistration. The next level is work under mentorship for a fixed period as agreed by the association. Because remember, the association, that's where you come from. You are in association, so the association is the one that initiates its processes. So you work under mentorship for a fixed period to fulfill agreed on requirements. We can agree on, must it be remedial? Maybe you must do a course or something else to upskill yourself. And the action there is reapply to SAQCC gas on completion of mentorship period. And then, of course, the worst scenario is you deregistered for life. And that means return your license and your book to the SAQCC gas. So this is the framework for which we, about 2 years ago, I think we reformulated, and it's much better than the one we initially had. We only had one was deregistered for life, but I think these two are amicable in terms of remedial. All right, that's deregistration sanctions. Let's look at the offences or hearings. If you look here, you've got skills and number of hearings, and that's the offence, and that's the sanction coming out of that offence. So we've had 4 domestic, 2 industrial, and this will be in LPG industrial, and this will be industrial thermal processing. So there were 8 offences on gross negligence. And this was the sanctions. They got final warning for 12 months, 9 months, and charges were dismissed due to no witness. There we go. So the big thing is, we've had 8 for gross negligence. Then you look here at fraud, dishonesty, and misrepresentation of facts. 5, 7, 9 of them on those levels. Final warning, 12 months. Then we had working outside scope, 6 on those levels, final warning. Then we had failure to carry out correct safe working procedure or observe safety and adhere to regulation standards, 5 on domestic level, deregistration. So those are the sanctions to date, the hearings to date with their respective sanctions and on different levels. The big thing about, let me just my notes, the big thing about a final warning is all these sanctions is, as you know it hangs over you like a sword, so you cannot repeat the same offence within that period. So if you get final warning for 12 months, that means that you've got to be a good person in 12 months and don't repeat the same offence. And if you do, it gets taken into consideration and can become aggravating circumstances. All right, so that's the hearings to date. And I'm going to close off by saying, I want you to look at that slide. I think it's very important. And you see in the middle here is your business. And I think that's what this goes about. This whole compliance framework goes about your business in the center. Now, what are all these circles? Just look at them. You've got statutory and regulatory requirements. You've got quality and environmental requirements. You've got safety and health environment requirements. You've got people. You have people in your company. You've got systems in your company. You've got processes in your company. So just look at what your business is impacted by. That's why I call it the functional compliance interrelationships, because it goes about the compliant interrelationship. You as a business needs to adhere to all these aspects, as I just said it to you, to make sure that you comply in all aspects that you need to comply to. And that's exactly where the disciplinary process is. It encompasses these compliant interrelationships. And that's very important to understand it. I hope that slide makes sense to you. Makes sense to me. But it's very important to show you that business today, there's a lot of things we need to be compliant to. And you get into trouble, not only by SAQCC gas, but by other regulatory bodies, such as government, statutory and regulatory, health, safety and health, and quality environmental. These things impact wherever you work. Please take care of it. This is your business. Make sure you understand the compliance framework. So in a nutshell, that's mainly what I spoke to you today about is the disciplinary process, its compliance, its policy, its codes and practices. If you apply those things within this framework, you're going to come out tops. And I wish you all well with that. Thank you.